Iran and the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, have agreed to resume inspections at nuclear sites, including those recently targeted by Israeli and US strikes. This comes as European powers threaten to reimpose sanctions under the so-called snapback mechanism. Iran has warned that if sanctions return, so too will the inspection agreement collapse. So what's really happening, and is there a viable path forward? Joining us today is Joel Rubin, former US government official with deep experience in national security and the Middle East, and a longtime supporter of nuclear diplomacy with Iran.
Iran does not have leverage if it holds back inspectors. That has demonstrated that it actually facilitates military action. So at a certain point, they need to change the attitude about leverage and come to the table to discuss. And that is where I think they've decided they don't want to go.
I'm Negar Moshahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Joel Rubin joins us now live in studio for Eye for Iran. Thank you for being here, Joel.
Of course. Thanks, Negar.
I just wanted to start with your background, your work inside the US government, and how your role intersected with the Iran nuclear file.
Well, I appreciate it. This work, my career in Washington, I've been here for over 25 years. And I've worked in different areas. I've worked in military affairs at the State Department, also in advocacy. I worked on the outside advocating for diplomacy with Iran in the political environment after having worked on Capitol Hill in the Senate. And then I went back into government in the Obama administration as our senior official, working with the House of Representatives for the State Department. So I've worked around this space from a number of angles. Iran policy is a dominant issue in foreign policy debates and discussions, as your audience is quite well aware. It has multiple angles to it. And for my work related to the nuclear deal, for many years I was advocating that because of our experience in Iraq, we needed to be very careful about sending in military forces into the region, needed to think differently about how to deal with the hard challenges, and in particular, the nuclear program that Iran was building. And so I advocated for a diplomatic outreach to see if that would potentially work. And as part of that work, we did end up achieving a nuclear deal back in 2015. And that was something that I not only advocated for as an outside voice, but also then in the Obama administration, behind the scenes, it helped to explain to Congress what that looked like.
And looking back, I mean, you did achieve the deal, as you said,
Yes.
But did it put in place what you wanted and the outcome you wanted? Or did the government not give it enough time to see the actual results? What are your thoughts on that, looking back now?
Well, one of the challenges with working with the United States, as every country around the world knows, is that we have these elections, and every 4 years or maybe 8 years, we have a change in government, and oftentimes it's a very significant change. And in particular, over the last decade, we've had radical differences in mindsets on foreign policy from president to president, from President Obama to Trump to Biden, now to Trump. And Trump is different this time from the last time. Very different. And so it's as if one can really never predict the future and how it will work. So in that deal, at that moment in time, my view was that was the best way to prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb from advancing and to avoid an American war. If that policy had been maintained, we might very well have a different outcome today.
And not be in the situation we're in.
But yes, but political leaders changed. President Trump came in. He pulled the United States out of that deal. That led to a dynamic where it was incredibly difficult to get the Iranians to want to come back into the deal. President Biden tried to get them back in the deal. They did not want to meet. Then, of course, we've seen other negative actions by the Iranian government in the region. And now we are in a very different place from a decade ago.
Now we are where we are right now.
Yes.
And what did you, when you were in the Obama administration, you're working on that Iran nuclear file, what did you learn about the Iranians themselves and how they negotiate? Maybe something that the public may not know that you can share with us.
You know, look, when it comes to negotiations in the Middle East, these are the longest negotiations. I roll my eyes. I don't mean to be sarcastic, but look, even at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, how many decades have we been talking about that? And it's a very narrow, very finite piece of land, and all the players know each other. All the Israeli leaders know all the Palestinian leaders, and vice versa. And they still can't come to any solvable, any permanent agreement. I'll put it that way. So when it comes to negotiating with Iran, what we saw was a very deliberate, slow process where the supreme leader was holding on for years. And then there was a change in government when President Rouhani came in 2013. And that seemed to open up a window that enabled the United States to lean in and to push on the negotiations. But still, these were not full, comprehensive end of conflict negotiations, and they got narrower and narrower to the point where we had to have an interim agreement on the nuclear file and did not have any agreements on anything else, which of course set up
and ballistic
the whole
missiles,
thing,
for example,
ballistic missiles, terrorism, all of that, human rights. So that, of course, created vulnerabilities, and the political vulnerabilities were clear. So when President Trump came in, he was already advocating how that deal, articulating how that deal was weak, and he was able to chip away at it because of the other arguments.
And at that time, I'm also just curious about this. Was there any talk or possibility of, oh my gosh, there is a nuclear Iran? Do you have any intel or knowledge on that?
Yeah, look, I think there was always a fear, and this is the thing it's a fascinating thing to think about. But when people talk politically about Democrats and the negotiations, they tend to think, the Obama team, they wanted Iran to get a bomb. It was the opposite. It was the inverse. There was this fear that Iran was moving its program forward, and that in order to get a hold of it,
and that's why it was such a priority
insight.
For you.
That's why it was priority. That's why there was a decision to try to push back the ability of Iran to advance its program, to get inspectors in, create a breakout window of a year, pull out the materials. All of that was because of a lack of trust, because of a lack of confidence in Iran. If the Democrats, if President Obama and the team had wanted there to be an Iranian nuclear weapon, we would never have engaged in negotiations. Just let them do what they want. No, this was, I'll never forget Undersecretary of State Sherman basically saying Iran is not a partner in the deal, they're the subject of the deal. And I think that was the mindset that we all had.
I've heard that from, I spoke with Richard Nephew, one of the lead negotiators who worked with Wendy Sherman, who you just mentioned, on Eye for Iran a couple of months ago, and he said, you don't negotiate with your friends. You negotiate when you're in a dispute with someone.
And you don't negotiate alone also, and that's also one of the takeaways here, is that for the United States, we've kind of isolated ourselves a bit on Iran policy, not completely. We see the Europeans are with us now again, but the strength of that negotiation back in 2013 to 15 was that it was the United States plus our partners, our allies in Europe, in the P5, not Israel, aligned. And of course, the Gulf states also had divergent views. That, of course, created additional vulnerabilities for the sustainability of the deal.
And what is your message to Iranian people right now? Because back in 2015, generally speaking, Iranian people were quite excited about the deal and the private investment that it brought, and the relief of sanctions and the hopes for prosperity and a better future. But nowadays, a lot of Iranians, and we're hearing this anecdotally and from people on the ground inside Iran, is they're not... they don't necessarily want a deal this time around, generally speaking, not speaking for 90 million people, of course. You can't gauge with what everyone wants, but generally speaking, they don't trust their government, obviously, and they feel that maybe a deal would only potentially benefit their regime. And they feel like they're in some sort of like limbo, right? What is your message to them now, especially with someone like yourself who did support the JCPOA, but my understanding, we talked earlier, and you can talk about this on camera now, is that your views may have changed with the new administration.
Yeah, I'll just start with the last comment that you made, which is Iran was moving too fast. It had accumulated too much enriched material at too high of a level. It was hiding the evidence. It was not engaging with inspectors. It was a bad faith act of the Iranian government in recent months prior to the bombing in June by Israel and then the United States.
And that was after they had pulled out of after the U.S. pulled out of the deal.
After the U.S. pulled out of the deal, after President Biden tried to get them back in, they didn't want to go back in. Even President Trump, goodness, this is a man who left the deal and then said, I want to get some negotiation back, and he wasn't making any headway.
Yeah, he was starting off with diplomacy,
at least starting off with diplomacy. He was trying, he was saying it. We could always critique the tactics of the diplomacy, but he at least put that message out, and he was there was no reciprocation. And so my view was at that moment in time, there was actually deep danger that Iran was going to accelerate and build a nuclear device. And so I supported the strikes. I supported the American response. I believe that it set back the program. I believe it was devastating. I also believe there needs to be a diplomatic agreement to lock in those gains. And that's where, for the Iranian people, to your question, I empathize. I feel for them. They're trapped, right? Like they're trapped. They have a regime that doesn't really care about their viewpoints. And at the same time, the United States, we don't want to get pulled into another war, but how do you deal and how do you engage the Iranian people right now? And in particular, my criticism of President Trump on foreign policy is that he is pulling back American soft power. So we are not funding USAID. We eliminated USAID, which is the best arm of American soft power around the world. Many firings at the State Department, curtailing of aid, even
mainly
funding
the Iranian media.
Even funding, yes, Iranian media and getting our information out in the Voice of America. And so all of the tools that one would use to engage the Iranian people are actually no longer in the toolkit. And that's very dangerous for the United States and the Iranian people. So I don't believe there's an antipathy by any stretch towards Iran and the Iranian people here in the United States. But I also don't think that we have a leadership in our government right now that is focusing on the Iranian people.
That's a very good point, and we appreciate that, because I know that's the number one thing Iranians always say is there's always talk about the nuclear file, but what about human rights? What about the everyday people?
Right. And I just to interject, Nagar, on that, look, I think that's a good question across the board. I don't believe this administration is making human rights a priority in its foreign policy.
Around the world.
Around the world.
We can
not
definitely
just on
see
Iran.
that. Yeah,
yes.
No, definitely. And Iran has agreed now to resume IAEA inspections, or to allow them back in, so they say.
Wonderful.
They came to this agreement, but there's no timeline, and they have tied this to the threat of the so-called snapbacks that the E3 says they're going to impose. So how do you interpret that move from Iran? What does that say to you?
They're trying every which way they can to prevent snapback, because snapback is going to be a devastating economic blow to Iran, to the regime, to the government. If they really want to get international faith restored, they need to come clean. They need to allow full inspections. They need to say they want to go back into a nuclear deal with the world. This is just tactical maneuvering to try to, as we say here, throw some dust in the eyes of the international community. And I don't think it's going to really work. Look, if Iran had nothing to hide, they would not be keeping inspectors out. They are in violation of multiple international standards. They have essentially prioritized the nuclear program over their people. And we have a dynamic where the Europeans, even though they were concerned about the military action taken in June, they have no confidence in what the Iranian government is saying, because there have been reports. And remember, there was, prior to the attack by Israel, there was an IAEA report that made it very clear that Iran was misbehaving in its nuclear program, that they were essentially wrapped by the Board of Governors, wrapped on the knuckles in a censure in a way that hadn't been done in 2 decades. And so I think Iran needs to understand, it actually has to restore some good faith confidence out there in Europe as well.
Yeah, and the IAEA report also said that they had further enriched their uranium, and we know about the 60%.
And we're seeing
too.
more since then as well, more reports about how Iran really was moving its program aggressively in the days prior to the bombing.
Yeah, now one of the recent reports that came out, and this is coming from Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, is that unaccounted for 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium is buried under rubble. Now that's their claim. So well, we don't know until there are inspectors on the ground, right?
We don't know, but it's the ancillary infrastructure as well that is required to weaponize, that is required to essentially not just enrich, but build a nuclear device. That whole infrastructure that was significantly damaged by the strikes. But of course, getting rid of 400 kilograms through bombing alone is not possible. So if it's buried, wonderful, let's verify it. But that's not the core point. The core point in all of this is the confidence the international community has in whether or not Iran is trying to build a bomb. And there is no confidence in what Iran is saying. So there needs to be that confidence established if there's ever going to be an agreement that allows for a different relationship between the West, between the United States and Iran, to help the Iranian people. And we're still a ways away from that.
So you said that agreement is like, throwing dust in the air. Do you see that then as leverage on behalf of the Iranians, or is it desperation?
I'm not sure they have much leverage. right now. And in fact, one could argue, and this goes to some of the dynamics we've seen over the last couple of years in the Middle East, that the leverage points that the Iranian government had created for decades have been eliminated. Look at Hezbollah essentially neutralized in Lebanon when it comes to being a threat to Israel. Hamas, this devastating war in Gaza, too many people being killed. But from a military perspective, Hamas has been deeply decimated. You look at the Houthis as well. Israel is focusing on them. The United States, we have our security partnerships in the region. I'm not sure what leverage Iran has.
And Bashar al-Assad is gone too now, which was
Thank
a huge,
you for that. Yes, losing your number one client state in the heart of the Middle East, it's a big loss. They're really without the leverage points that they spent decades building up. So what are their leverage points? And that is a recognition clearly that the regime has not made, that they don't have the same leverage. They don't have the same strength any longer. And you hear this in Washington. I want to mention this, that, if the United States bombed, we would be sucked into a war that would cost thousands of lives, that Hezbollah would unleash rockets, Iran is powerful and everyone else is weak. I don't know what universe those people are living in. That analysis is completely counterfactual. Iran does not have leverage. If it holds back inspectors, that has demonstrated that it actually facilitates military action. So at a certain point, they need to change the attitude about leverage and come to the table to discuss. And that is where I think they've decided they don't want to go.
So does that, in a sense, mean, in your interpretation, that Trump's maximum pressure and these strikes, Israeli and American, in that sense was successful in terms of their goal within the nuclear file for now?
Well, the question of what's the goal is to prevent an Iranian bomb. If that's the goal, then yes, it was successful at setting it back. But it's ultimately successful when it's locked in and verifiably so that they will never get there again. And that's where we're not currently. So we have to keep a watchful eye. Iran is isolated militarily. The context for Iran in the region is very negative.
Collapsed.
And
the regime has not collapsed.
And so this is the other, on the other side of the argument, there's a lot of desire to see the regime collapse, or a belief, and I think even during the war there were arguments being made that this is it. This is how the regime collapses.
But it wasn't.
But it wasn't. And having gone through the Iraq War, and I served as a civil servant at the State Department during the Bush administration when we invaded Iraq, I worked in military affairs and Middle East affairs. I understand sort of the culture of a government at the time of doing an invasion of another country, and the chest thumping, the excitement, and then the realization that, oh no, maybe this isn't exactly what we were looking for. I don't really believe that there's a simple regime change solution for Iran. I have not yet seen one. And if that requires massive American and foreign invasion, that's unlikely to take place.
And given your background with the U.S. government and foreign policy in the military, serving on your area of expertise in Iran and the nuclear file, what is the end game here with the U.S. government?
The end game ultimately is to close the nuclear file in a verifiable manner that is clear, and to ultimately move to a different relationship with Iran where they are not threatening their neighbors and they are not pushing into the region. But I got to tell you, Nagar, we are in a different world right now on Iran policy. For many years, that debate and what I outlined, that was sort of a static situation. What Israel has done by hitting Hezbollah, the Houthis, what we did by hitting the nuclear program has created a very different paradigm on American policy towards Iran. And I don't think it's been fully defined yet. I do think there's a space for what do we do about the Iranian people? And it's interesting when you talk to the Iranian American community here and you see the polling, that's of course their number one issue of concern. And that's a place in policy that we have not been effective in the United States at figuring out how to engage the Iranian people, how to think about them first. We did that, interestingly, during the Soviet Union. We thought about the Soviet Union as not just a military threat, but also as an opportunity to engage and get into the society. And we set up human rights mechanisms. We set up international pressure campaigns on the Soviet Union regarding human rights. That was part of the broad collapse, the internal implosion of the Soviet Union. So if we're going to have an Iran policy, we have to think a little bit longer game, and we have to think a lot more about the Iranian people.
And I certainly hope they do, because they deserve that. They deserve whatever the best is. I don't know what that is, but they deserve human dignity and respect and a normal life like everyone else.
You know, I think there is a modest awareness in Washington, but not enough of an awareness of the high level of education, the complexity of the Iranian people, the diversity of the nation. The Iranian Americans that are here in the United States, their contributions are significant. They are in medical fields, in technology fields, strong leaders in multiple areas, professionally, politically, from diverse in both parties. I think there's a growing awareness of that, but not an awareness enough of what the opportunity is with the Iranian people, a massive country with a significant pro-Israel, I should say, but also pro-American mindset. And I don't think there's a hatred of Israel either in the Iranian culture. And you talk to Israelis about this, and they still have the memories of the pre-revolution period and the relationship between Israel and Iran. So there's a lot of opportunity there. That is not, it's just not been communicated enough.
And I think there's also a lack of distinction between the regime's national interests and the people of Iran. I think that a lot of officials sometimes think, oh, well, we're going to hit their nuclear sites. That's their pride and joy. Not for the regular, everyday people of Iran. They don't care about the nuclear infrastructure. They're much more progressive than that. And you could see it didn't lead to protests. It didn't lead to people rising up or civil disobedience.
No, there was a sort of a sense of depression, I think, is what we saw. Like the Iranian people, they see that this is where I would go to something we spoke about earlier. They don't have much say in their government, right? They don't have any control over it. The Massa, the protests of a couple of years ago.
And we're coming up to the anniversary again. Yeah.
So, I mean, that caught people's attention. That was big. And I think in the White House and the Biden team, they had some meetings and they tried, and then maybe there was a missed opportunity, and then years ago as well. People understand there's something under there. And when you look at the Iranian people and how, to your point, there is no protest against the West in any significant way after these strikes, it should give an insight into the sort of the political zeitgeist of the country. All that said, that does not mean that there is an easy, simple shot. And in America, one of our weaknesses is that we really do like simplicity when it comes to policy. Like, what's that unicorn policy? What's that one thing? Maybe that one invasion, that one regime change where we take out the leader and everything gets better. And I just don't buy it. Maybe I'm too old.
No, it's way more complex than that. No, not at all.
It doesn't work.
It's much more complex than that.
Very complex.
So what does success look like then? I mean, if it's about just the nuclear file, then we don't know if all the sites were completely obliterated per se.
Right.
Obviously, it did have a devastating blow for sure. We have to wait for more intelligence and inspections on the ground to really determine and understand what happened fully, to have a holistic picture of that. But if let's say they set it back by a few months to a year, what would the breakout time be right now? And also some critics to military strikes could say, well, the JCPOA did the same thing. And at the time, Iran was complying, and the facts show that they were.
Well, I think that's true. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, look, I mean, the breakout time, even under the Biden team, they were saying 10 to 15 days potential. I'm sure it's been elongated now. And then, of course, there's the reality that strikes could continue. But
what would they strike? That's my question. Like, what's the next step?
Only if they see additional construction at sites or digging out at sites potentially. But that's not a real solution.
So not regime officials or targets? Like, is there like a next step, right? Each time there's a military action, the next strike is more severe than the first one,
Well, this is the risk, right? For many years, we had we have the United States a policy, of course, towards Lebanon, where we're close to the Lebanese government, but we also have seen Hezbollah. And for many years, we would watch Israel hitting and striking. We don't want that dynamic with Iran. It's a very different dynamic. What we want is to get close the file on the nuclear issue, and I think that's one of the points that is very important to recognize, that from the Obama administration perspective, we closed the file. Like, there was confidence, there was a year breakout, there was an inspection regime that would review it, there was a mechanism, so we were done. So now we can move to other things. And We didn't. The government here changed. The policy went to maximum pressure and eventually leaving the JCPOA. And so now here we are again. But it's still the same objective. How do you close the nuclear file? With confidence. So you don't have to have repeated bombing raids as your only response, which is a very risky position to be put in. Because imagine as well, for Israel and the United States, if you're only relying on bombing raids, you have to make sure that you're precise and effective. We just saw Israel strike a group of people in Doha,
yeah, what did you
targeting,
think about that?
And it wasn't effective. This is my point. You're not always going to be successful in military strikes. There have to be other ways to achieve your goals. I'll get to that in a second. But I think the goal still is to close the nuclear file with confidence so that we can then move to begin to open up Iran, to begin to trade with Iran, to begin to make the people a priority. But the nuclear file is the major blockage. Even though it was set back, there's not yet certitude and confidence of what was achieved and that it will not revert back to what Iran was doing before.
Does President Trump think that it's closed in the sense that he says, it's been obliterated?
He says it's obliterated, but
so then what's the point of inspections or anything if it's been?
He's sort of implied, well, if we have to do it again, we'll do it again. It's sort of the comprehensive way of talking about an issue, talking about it in two different directions at the same time. But I think that there's a clear understanding that while it was obliterated and set back, it wasn't necessarily eliminated completely and taken out. And the Iranians, this is the challenge. And this is, again, one of the challenges we ran up against, and it's not gone away. There is knowledge in Iran about how to build a nuclear program. And yes, killing the top nuclear scientists takes that knowledge off the playing field and sets it back.
For now.
But was every document eliminated?
No.
Was every scientist killed?
No.
And that's why we're in this moment we're in, which is good. It was set back. The risk is gone. It did not start a major war in the region. No American troops were killed. But we don't really have a clarity on this nuclear program enough to feel like we can move on from this discussion.
And it's not necessarily over, right? And I wanted to ask you again about that. Like, what are some of the risks? When I think about it, I think to myself, okay, well, there could be, like you said, if they start moving some stuff around or start building new things, more strikes, more stalling, if there's more talks about, IAEA inspections and agreements. Yeah, but could this potentially cause like a perpetual deadlock of confrontation with Iran, where you've got this regime in a weakened position where you can, but they haven't collapsed, and you just run this risk of having this forever conflict with Iran.
Yeah,
for those, doesn't seem to go away.
So for those who I'll speak to the Iranian American community, and as a Jewish American, I have personal feelings about Israel, and so it's a little deeper than just policy.
Of course.
For those who really want a different relationship between Iran and the United States, and really want to see it move into a place of peace, of economic cooperation, of trade, of being able to visit back and forth without being afraid of getting arrested by either side.
Hostage taking, yeah.
In both directions, let's be honest. There's a lot of concern in the Iranian American community about
when
their security here. The nuclear issue has to be put to bed. It is not the only thing, but it has to be put to bed. So that has to be part of the strategies. How do we take this nuclear issue and lock it down and say we now know it? You have to have an agreement with Iran, and you have to have international support for it, and you have to have inspectors who are verifying that what the Iranians say they're going to or not to do with their program is actually happening. And you have to have robust agreements like that. And that does mean, and this is the challenge for Trump, because he and his team really do believe in the maximum pressure. And many advocates, those opposed to the regime, also want maximum pressure. There is a price for that. At a certain point, if Iran, if it's locked down, if they agree to that, what's the price? The price is likely repeal of certain sanctions. And that has to be integrated into a fuller strategy. But that is also something that people will have to grapple with. What are we willing to give to get something? Because in my view, getting the Iranian nuclear program issue locked down with certitude they will never get a bomb is the critical piece to unlocking the American-Iranian relationship for the future.
And like you said, if then that's put to bed, it could hopefully open up other avenues to look at other aspects of Iran that are quite important, and hopefully maybe in fact strengthen the Iranian people so they're not coming from a position of weakness and come from a position of strength.
Imagine if they don't have to worry about that being an issue and no one has to worry about that, and that's just out. All of a sudden, you then have a situation where the Iranian people can start to push their government to allow for more investment, to allow for more trade, to change their dynamic from within. Yeah, maybe it's because when I started my career, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. So I went and I served overseas. I lived in a developing country in Central America, and I lived in the village. And I think that experience of understanding that the best people to change what's happening in their country are the people of that country, because it's their place, it's their home. They're the ones that are going to decide the future of the country. The Iranian people, despite the fact that the regime is as horrible and diabolical as it is, the Iranian people are going to be the ones that are going to determine the future of Iran. And so when we take the nuclear issue off the table, we take a sort of a plug out of the tub, and we allow for new oxygen, we allow for new ideas, we now allow for pressure from inside to begin to grow, because that's not going to be hovering. There's not going to be are the Americans going to bomb us? Are the Israelis going to bomb us again? And the regime, I'll finish with this, the regime also can't use that
as an excuse,
as a cudgel, as an excuse, and use that and say, look at that enemy, and we have to have our nuclear program. No, it's gone. And then what do they stand for? And then they have to explain their economic policies and their social policies.
And have to be held accountable. So if I'm hearing this right, then in order to help the Iranian people, you actually have to re-engage with the government that is suppressing them in the first place to help strengthen the people of Iran, because in the process, they serve to benefit in some ways too. So its engagement is key here.
Distasteful as it is, going back to what Richard said, and Yitzhak Rubin has said this, and many great leaders have said this, that you don't make peace with your friends, you make it with your enemies. And just because we have an agreement today does not mean it's an agreement forever. But if we want the Iranian people to have at least a shadow of an opportunity to shape the future of their country as they want it, we need to unblock it by unblocking this nuclear program question. Now, I do think the standards should be higher. When we go back to Iran and when we get a negotiation, it should not be 2015 all over again. It is 2025.
Because Americans have more leverage now.
We have more leverage. Human rights. We bombed it. Human rights. We can go back and bomb again. And the Iranian bad behavior was so extraordinary that even the Europeans chastised them, right? So I think we should demand much more than we did in 2015. Because in 2015, remember, just what the dynamics were, Nagar. There was no agreement at all. There was no precedent. There was no baseline. It was just empty. But that's no longer the case. And so I do think we should demand more. And if the Iranian regime says no, then they are going to stay in this hard pressure dynamic. And that is where we have to also think about the Iranian people differently as well. I'm going to put in my plug here again. And just say the current American government, the Trump team, does not use the tools and is not using the tools that the American government has used for years to support human rights in repressive societies. We have seen the Trump team take those tools away. And that is unprecedented.
And even VPNs recently in Iran, is my understanding. I was reading in a Washington Post article, because they're trying to push for Starlink or something, which could actually be quite expensive and not accessible to all Iranian people.
There's bipartisan angst on Capitol Hill because programs that they have funded the funds are not being used to provide better technology to the Iranian people for communications. This is like long-standing bipartisan support. You want to support the Iranian people, support communications technology going into Iran. One of the features of this administration, this is a bigger modus operandi. This is how they do their work. Is they're doing basically they're withholding funds that have been appropriated by Congress and just not spending the money, which in my view is illegal. and it's in the courts, and we'll see. But basically, it's the Trump White House that's deciding that it does not want to spend that money. It's not Congress. It's not a bipartisan or a partisan issue. It's purely an ideology from the Trump National Security staff that they don't want to be using American dollars overseas to engage people and promote human rights.
So my kind of takeaway from today's conversation is the key right now is engagement.
It's always engagement. Of course, I have that's my ideology, but be tough, but engage the people, and have a diplomatic strategy that locks in the gains that were made from that military action. Look, no military action is sustainable in terms of the wins unless you get the agreement. We had an agreement with Japan after Hiroshima.
Exactly.
We had,
and now look.
But we dropped 2 nuclear weapons on that country and still sat at the table, signed an agreement, end of war, right? Like, you think about it, we dropped nuclear weapons, that was the end of the war, but it wasn't. It was a diplomatic agreement. It was a determination of a new status of the emperor, who became from a god king, to just a normal person. We changed their political environment, and then we rewrote their constitution. But that was all based upon a diplomatic agreement. And with a country that had hit us at Pearl Harbor, that had killed millions of people in Asia, and we still dealt with them. And that's the approach we need to have.
Well, thank you so much. That was a really enlightening and fascinating
Thanks,
conversation.
My pleasure.
Joel Rubin today on Eye for Iran. If you like this episode, hit the like button or leave us a comment. We'd love to know what you think. The Eye for Iran podcast series is brought to you by Iran International, your go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, you can head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.